Stand there if you must, Eleanor, but for heaven's sake do not look hopeful. The words were spoken lightly, almost musically, and that made them crueler. Laughter answered them at once, soft and polished as gloves brushing silk. In the long drawing room at Lady Corbin's house, where candles burned in tears and the mirrors doubled every jeweled throat and white shoulder, no one raised a voice. They did not need to. People of breeding knew how to wound with perfect composure. Eleanor Vale stood beside the marble hearth with a string of seed pearls looped over one hand, because her sister had commanded them, and her mother had said she was useful there. The pearls had belonged to her grandmother once, though Rosamond wore them now against her bright young skin, as if beauty itself had granted her the right to every lovely thing. Eleanor's own gown had been Rosamond's last spring, altered in haste, and dyed a shade of blue that only made its age more visible. The lace at the sleeves had yellowed. Her gloves had been mended so carefully that the stitching was almost art. Almost. Hopeful? Rosamond echoed, lifting her chin toward the mirror, while Eleanor fastened the clasp at her neck. I assure you, Mamma, Eleanor has far too much sense. Mrs. Vale smiled at their reflection, her eyes moving past Eleanor, as if she were already part of the furniture. Sense is not the danger. Hunger is. A girl who has had no offers by 24 may be tempted to mistake civility for admiration. That won another flutter of laughter from Lady Corbin and the two ladies seated nearest her. One of them, Mrs. Finchley, peered over the top of her painted fan. Then keep her back from Lord Renford tonight. The poor man must not be confused. Rosamond laughed then, because it was expected, because she always laughed when she was expected to, as if there were any danger of confusion. Eleanor's fingers did not falter on the clasp. She had learned long ago that stillness could save more pride than protest. A flush crept beneath her skin all the same. It began in her throat and spread upward, hot as humiliation always was, and yet her face remained composed. The pearls snapped into place. Rosamond reached up to admire them without once saying thank you. Lady Corbin turned in her chair, satin rustling. You may stand near the palms, Eleanor. Shadow is kind to everyone, and if Lord Renford asks after your sister, do not answer before Rosamond does. A plain girl can be useful in many ways, but never as an interruption. The ladies smiled. One of them said, if the Earl does not admire beauty, he may always admire obedience. That one struck deeper than the rest. Eleanor felt it. She felt everything. But she also knew that if she answered, if she gave them even one wounded syllable, they would call her sensitive and ungracious and unfit for society on top of everything else. So she bent her head, as if accepting instructions from a governess, and said nothing at all. Above them, hidden by carved walnut railings and a row of potted orange trees, a man who had retreated to the musicians' gallery to escape introductions stood very still. Lord Adrian Renford had come upstairs 2 minutes earlier by a side staircase, intending to wait until Lady Corbin's guests had arranged themselves into manageable clusters. He disliked being led from ambition to ambition by hostesses who spoke of eligible daughters in the same tone they used for horseflesh and china. He had not meant to overhear anything, yet once the first remark reached him, he did not move. Something in the quiet of the woman below arrested him more completely than outrage would have done. He could not see her face at first. He saw only the bowed head, the faded blue gown, the hands folded together over the pearls she no longer held. Then Rosamond shifted. Candlelight found the elder sister's features in the glass, and he saw what the room had chosen not to see. Not beauty of the flashing sort, no. There was no triumphant bloom about Eleanor Vale, nothing bright enough to command a ballroom at 20 paces. But there was grace in the shape of her mouth, intelligence in the steady line of her brow, and a dignity so wounded and so fiercely guarded that it altered the air around her. Mrs. Vale rose and adjusted one of Rosamond's curls with tender fingers she had not used on Eleanor in years. Remember, my love, Lord Renford is not a man to be caught by silliness. Speak with feeling. He has had grief and will value delicacy. Rosamond's eyes danced. Then I shall be delicate. And you, Lady Corbin said, pointing her fan toward Eleanor without looking at her. "We'll be invisible. We ask little enough." This time Eleanor answered. Her voice was low, steady, and more devastating for its calm. "You need not fear. I have long since learned what is not meant for me." Silence followed it. Only a beat, no more. Yet in that beat, Adrian felt something tighten in his chest, as if a hand had closed there. The sentence was too practiced to be new. She had said it to herself before, many times perhaps. That was what made it unbearable. Below, the room recovered. A footman entered with fresh candles. Someone remarked upon the weather. Rosamond moved toward the doors to await the most desirable arrivals. Eleanor stepped back exactly as instructed, into the fringe of palm shadows where the light was kind enough to blur what fashion had judged deficient. Adrian remained at the balcony rail a moment longer, looking down. He had been hunted all month by women who smiled with calculation and mothers who measured his income in polite phrases. Yet the only person in the room who seemed to want nothing from him was the woman they had just tried to erase. That alone would have interested him. The courage with which she helped them erase her made it impossible to forget her. He descended before he had decided why. When Lord Renford entered the drawing room, conversation altered without seeming to. It always did where great wealth and an old title crossed polished floors. Heads turned in increments, fans shifted. Lady Corbin's face brightened into delight so expertly timed that it might have been rehearsed. Rosamond stepped half a pace forward, exactly where the candlelight touched her bare shoulders and her pearls. Eleanor, obedient to her instructions, moved further back. Adrian bowed to Lady Corbin, then to Mrs. Vale. He said the necessary things. He gave Rosamond exactly enough notice to be courteous, and not one grain more. While Lady Corbin began a stream of praise about Rosamond's singing, he let his gaze travel, apparently by accident, to the palms near the window. Eleanor looked up just then. Their eyes met across the room. The strangest thing about it was not that she blushed. He expected that. It was that she immediately lowered her gaze again, not coyly, not with the practiced modesty society admired, but with the swift caution of someone who had learned attention was dangerous. He could almost hear the warning already shaping in her mind. Not for you. Lady Corbin was speaking of an upcoming house party at her country seat, Ashdown Park. A larger gathering, a better setting, music, riding, a little archery if the weather held. Adrian answered what he must. He scarcely heard himself. Eleanor had moved toward the terrace doors. A child had dropped a ribbon near the threshold, and she bent to retrieve it, smoothing it, before handing it back with a gentleness that made the child smile up at her before running away. No one else noticed. Adrian did. By the time Lady Corbin turned to present Rosamond more formally, Eleanor had slipped out to the terrace. He accepted the invitation to Ashdown Park while looking past the hostess's shoulder into the darkness where the elder daughter had vanished. Then, before Rosamond could begin her delicate conversation, he excused himself with the first plausible reference to heat and crossed the room after the woman they had consigned to shadow. The terrace lay silver beneath the summer moon. Beyond the balustrade, the gardens sank into dusky lawns and clipped hedges, and the scent of roses lifted on warm air. Eleanor stood alone beside a stone urn overflowing with white climbing blooms. She had one hand braced lightly upon the urn's rim, as if only there, beyond the lamps and chandeliers, could she permit the weight of the evening to touch her. She heard the terrace door behind her and straightened at once. When she turned and saw him, astonishment flashed openly across her face before discipline restored it. "My lord," she said, dropping a small curtsy, "I did not know anyone was here." "That much is evident," Adrian said. The words came out drier than he intended. For an instant he thought he had offended her. Then something like unwilling amusement moved at the corner of her mouth. "No doubt I ought to apologize for trespassing upon your air," she said. "On the contrary, I came to trespass upon yours." That surprised her more. He saw it. Her eyes were dark in the moonlight, larger than they had seemed in the drawing room, and there was intelligence in them that no faded gown could hide. She looked at him directly now, because here, Away from the audience below, there was nothing to gain from pretending not to exist. You are frank, my lord. I find it preferable to those other accomplishments expected of me tonight, such as admiring music before it is played and predicting attachment before one has heard a single sentence. He gave a short laugh. Exactly such as those. It was the wrong thing to enjoy. She was a stranger. Yet he felt, standing there, a relief so immediate it was nearly dangerous. No fluttering, no calculation. Her reserve was not artifice but armor, and he knew armor when he saw it. He wore his own every day. She glanced back toward the drawing room. You should return before Lady Corban imagines you abducted by moonlight. I doubt Lady Corban imagines anything she has not first arranged. Again that quick, startling flicker at her lips. Then for your safety, my lord, you must go in before she arranges your future entirely. You are not afraid to mock your aunt. Only when she is not present to punish me for it. Ah, then I am to understand you are only brave in private. At that, something shifted in her expression. Not anger, not quite. A little sadness, perhaps, and a little weariness, as if bravery were a luxury she had never been allowed to purchase. No, she said softly. Only costly. The words settled between them. Adrian looked at her. The terrace suddenly felt narrower than it was. Somewhere inside, a violin began to tune. He ought to have said something light. Instead, he heard himself ask, "Why did you not answer them?" Her fingers tightened on the stone urn. Moonlight whitened her knuckles. My lord, if you wish to be generous, do not pretend you did not hear. So she knew, or guessed. He considered dissembling, then rejected it. She deserved better than another polite falsehood. I heard enough. A flush rose slowly along her cheekbones. It was not the embarrassed pink of flirtation, but the terrible, involuntary color shame brings when a private wound is dragged into daylight. Adrian regretted the question at once. I did not remain to eavesdrop, he said. I had gone upstairs to escape a different kind of management. She lowered her gaze. Then I am sorry my family's efforts at mine became your entertainment. It was not entertainment. No. Her smile this time was brief and sharp enough to cut herself on. Then perhaps instruction. Society always teaches. He stepped closer before he quite knew he meant to. If society taught you silence, it taught the wrong woman. There was more courage in your stillness than in all their laughter. She looked up very quickly. That moved her. He saw that it did, though she wanted him not to. She had likely not been defended in that voice, with that certainty, in a very long time. You are kind, she said, and the sentence itself was a retreat. Kindness is often the prettiest form of pity. Do I strike you as a man skilled in pretty forms? This time her laugh escaped before she could hide it. It changed her face entirely. For the space of one breath, all the guardedness fell away, and she seemed not plain at all, only alive. The terrace doors opened behind them. Music spilled outward. Rosamond's bright voice floated through the frame, asking if anyone had seen Lord Renford. Eleanor's features closed at once. You must go, she said quietly. He should have. Instead, he held her gaze and said, Will you dance tonight, Miss Vale? Her answer came at once, almost startled. No one has asked me. I am asking now. She stared at him. Behind her, the white roses stirred in the night air like witnessing things. My lord, she said, you ought not. Why? You know why. Because the room would talk. Because her mother would be enraged. Because Rosamond had already been placed like an offering in the light. Because such a gesture from him would mean more than the asking of a dance. He knew all of it. He knew, too, that for perhaps the first time in weeks, he wanted something simple and honest enough to feel like defiance. I have rarely found ought not a compelling argument, he said. She swallowed. Then allow me a stronger one. If you dance with me, everyone will believe it means something, and if it means nothing, I should look foolish. I have had enough of that for one evening. The honesty of it struck him harder than any coquetry could have done. There it was. Not plea, not maneuver, just truth, laid bare and steady between them. He bowed his head a little. "Then I will not ask unless I mean it." She searched his face, as if looking for mockery, and not finding it disturbed her more than mockery would have done. The music inside began in earnest. Voices swelled. A footman passed the terrace doors and glanced away quickly. At last Eleanor said, with visible effort, "Then if you still mean it when the set begins, I shall say yes." Adrian inclined his head. "I still mean it now." And when he returned to the drawing room, crossed past Rosamond's bright expectancy and Lady Corbin's sharpened smile, and stood before the woman in the faded blue gown to request her hand for the first dance, the room learned in one astonished silence what it was to watch invisibility fail. Rosamond's face lost colour before it recovered in a brilliant smile too quick to be real. Mrs. Vale's fingers clenched around her fan. Lady Corbin looked, for one naked second, as though someone had upset a tray in the middle of her best carpet. Yet no one could object aloud, not with half the county watching, not with the Earl himself standing calm as stone. Eleanor placed her trembling hand in his. If the room had expected gratitude, she did not show it. If it had expected triumph, there was none of that either. She rose with composure, but Adrian felt the tremor in her fingers, saw the way her breath caught once as they joined the set. Not because she was vain, because dignity, after years of being denied, can feel as frightening as joy. "You may yet repent this," she murmured, as they faced one another. "I begin to suspect repentance would imply an error." "And you never commit them." "I commit them constantly," he said. "Only not, I think, tonight." The music drew them through the figures. He had danced 1,000 times before in glittering rooms with women more admired, more artful, more certain of their effect. None had ever seemed as present beneath his hand as Eleanor Vale. She danced beautifully, not with performance but with attention. She listened to the music. She moved with grace she did not know she possessed. When another gentleman joined the set, and she turned away, Adrian found himself impatient for the next figure simply to see her face again. And the room saw it too. It saw him look. That was enough to start a dozen stories before the first turn had finished. At supper, Lady Corbin contrived to seat Rosamond at Adrian's right hand and Eleanor 3 places away among the lesser company. Adrian answered Rosamond's bright inquiries with faultless politeness. He would not reward rudeness with rudeness. But when Eleanor was asked about the old Abbey chapel on the Ashdown grounds and spoke for the first time of Norman arches and weather-softened carvings with a knowledge that startled the table into silence, he turned toward her fully and forgot Rosamond's latest anecdote in the process. "You know the estate well, Miss Vale," he said. "I have spent several summers with my aunt," she replied. "Some corners are friendlier than drawing rooms." Lady Corbin smiled with all her teeth. "Eleanor wanders because she dislikes society." "Or because society dislikes her," Rosamond said lightly, then laughed as if she had made a harmless jest. Mrs. Vale touched her arm in warning. Too late. Adrian set down his glass with perfect care. "Then society's judgment is poorer than I believed," he said. No one answered that. Rosamond went pink. Lady Corbin began speaking rapidly of the roses at Ashdown Park. Eleanor did not look at him again for the remainder of the meal, but he saw her throat move once, as if she had swallowed something difficult. That night the house buzzed with interpretation. By morning, every servant and guest had decided whether Adrian Renford had singled out the elder Miss Vale from perversity, caprice, rebellion, or some hidden stratagem of his own. The only persons who seemed least able to understand it were the women who had mocked Eleanor most confidently the evening before. Mrs. Vale cornered her daughter before breakfast. Eleanor was fastening the plain morning gown she wore for ordinary hours when her mother entered without knocking. "What possessed you?" Mrs. Vale demanded. Eleanor turned from the mirror. "I was asked to dance. I accepted. You might have declined." "And insulted our hostess's most important guest." Mrs. Vale's mouth thinned. "Do not sharpen yourself at me, Eleanor. You know very well what I mean." Rosamond was meant to attract his notice. Eleanor looked at her mother for a long moment. "I do not believe a grown man's eyes can be governed from the doorway." "Do not be impertinent." I am being accurate. Mrs. Vale drew herself up. Accuracy will not keep a roof over us if Lady Corbin takes offence. There it was, at last. Not beauty, not propriety, survival. Eleanor's anger cooled into the older thing beneath it, the weary ache she carried almost always where her family was concerned. Since her father's death 3 years earlier, every conversation in the Vale household had ended at the same altar: money, Rosamond's prospects, Lady Corbin's generosity, the diminishing income of a small, debt-struck estate, and the humiliations thought necessary to repair it. Eleanor had sown, budgeted, sacrificed, soothed creditors, dismissed servants they could not afford, and sold the last of her own trinkets quietly enough that no one had thanked her for noticing they were gone. Still, it was Rosamond's face that was meant to save them. "If Lady Corbin is offended," Eleanor said, "it is not because I encouraged him." "I did not." Mrs. Vale came closer, lowering her voice. "Whether you encouraged him or not is irrelevant. What matters is what men imagine. A woman in your position cannot afford to be remarkable in the wrong direction." "My position," Eleanor repeated. "Yes, you are no longer in first bloom. You have no dowry worth naming. You must understand realities better than Rosamond does." Eleanor almost laughed, not from mirth, from the sheer familiarity of the wound. "I assure you, Mamma, I understand them very well." "Then prove it. Keep out of his way today." Mrs. Vale left her there with that command, still hanging in the room like stale perfume. Eleanor stood motionless a moment, fingers resting on the dressing table. Then she finished fastening her gown, lifted her chin, and went down to breakfast. Ashdown Park was more beautiful in morning light than candlelight had promised. Lady Corbin's country seat rose honey-coloured above lawns falling toward a small lake. There were terraces of roses, a glass orangery, ancient beeches on the drive, and a chapel ruin beyond the yew walk that Eleanor loved better than any of the polished rooms inside. She had always loved what weather softened and time made honest. The breakfast room windows stood open to the summer air. Guests drifted in gradually. Rosamond arrived radiant in pale green muslin and a smile so bright it already looked tired. Lady Corbin took the head of the table as if she had been born conducting mornings. Adrian entered last, son on his shoulders, his expression unreadable. Eleanor had intended to sit quietly near the far end and make herself uninteresting. The intention survived exactly 40 seconds. Lord Renford paused by her chair. "Miss Vale, would you prefer tea or chocolate? I seem to be nearest both." Conversation dipped. Not entirely. Just enough. "Tea, my lord." "Thank you." He handed it to her himself, then took the chair opposite, rather than the one Lady Corbin had obviously left beside Rosamond. Rosamond's smile held. Lady Corbin's did not. He asked Eleanor whether she had truly studied architecture or simply wandered ruins with unusual attention. She answered because not answering would be theatrical, and she was tired of letting other people choreograph her into absurdity. What began with stone tracery drifted to old churches, then to books, then to a Roman historian neither of them expected the other to have read. By the time a platter of hot rolls had circled the table, Rosamond had been reduced to listening, while the plain elder sister became, in spite of everyone's plans, the most interesting woman in the room. It should have felt like victory. It felt like danger. After breakfast, Lady Corbin arranged a walk to the rose garden. Mrs. Vale took Rosamond's arm and steered her neatly into Adrian's path, but one of Lady Corbin's little spaniels had escaped into the lavender border, and Eleanor stooped instinctively to catch it before it could upset a gardener's entire tray of seedlings. By the time she rose, Adrian was beside her, the dog in his arms, and an unmistakable smile in his eyes. "You save plants as well as children," he said. "It is only dogs and disasters that seek me out, my lord." "Then I am uncertain what category includes earls." "The inconvenient one." He laughed, and because he laughed, two elderly ladies on the path turned their heads with interest. Rosamond saw. Eleanor saw Rosamond see. A lesser woman might have been pleased by that. Eleanor felt only the first edge of dread. She tried, for the next 2 days, to obey her mother's instructions. She chose different rooms. She took longer routes through the corridors. She lingered with the older guests and offered to read aloud to Lady Pettigrew when everyone else rode out. Yet Lord Renford kept finding her, as if she were, perversely, the one honest point on a map, crowded with decorations. He found her in the library when she stood on a stool, reaching for a book from the upper shelf, and steadied the ladder with one hand until she came down. He found her in the orangery while she was tying up a broken stem of jasmine, and listened as she explained why overwatering was a more fatal kindness than neglect. He found her on the lawn when a gust of wind sent a sheaf of music flying from Lady Corbin's terrace table, and helped her catch the pages while Rosamond complained of the sun. Every encounter carried its own danger, because none of them felt contrived. That was what unsettled Eleanor most. If he had been obviously flirtatious, she could have dismissed him as careless. If he had been charitable, she could have defended herself against him. But Adrian Renford did not behave like a man distributing attentions. He behaved like a man surprised into sincerity. On the third afternoon, rain drove everyone indoors before the riding party returned. Guests scattered toward fires and card tables. Eleanor, escaping the crush of the drawing room, took refuge in the old chapel ruin where the roof had half fallen in long ago, leaving one side open to the weather. She loved the place in rain. Water darkened the stone. Ivy shone. The broken arches made even solitude feel ceremonial. She thought herself alone until a masculine voice said behind her, "I begin to suspect you prefer the company of walls to people." She turned. Adrian stood in the chapel doorway, hat in hand, rein on his shoulders. "My lord, if Lady Corbin has sent you to fetch me, tell her I was struck by lightning and could not come." "She did not send me. Everyone else considers this place melancholy. It is peaceful. It is ruined. Those are not always different things." He stepped inside, glancing up at the open patch where grey sky showed through stone ribs overhead. "I am relieved to hear someone say so." Eleanor looked at him. "Do you find ruins peaceful?" "No, only honest." There was that word again. Almost. Honest. It moved through her like the rain-cooled air. She looked away first. He came to stand beside her, not close enough to alarm, near enough that his presence was undeniable. For a while they watched the rain fall through the broken roof into the grass, where an altar had once stood. "My sister loved churches," he said at length. It was the first time he had spoken of his family, beyond a dutiful mention at dinner. Eleanor turned to him, surprised by the softness in his voice. "Loved. She died 4 years ago. I am sorry. So was I." His mouth altered, not in bitterness but in memory. Anne disliked crowds. She was shy. She stammered if pressed too hard. Society called it timidity, then dullness, then amusement. By the end of her first season, she dreaded entering a room. Eleanor's breath caught. She understood at once why he had listened from the balcony and not dismissed what he heard as common drawing-room cruelty. This was not a man merely offended by vulgarity. This was a man marked by it. "I should not tell you this," he said quietly. "I almost never do." "Then why tell me?" He looked at her fully. Rain sounded in the chapel around them, 1,000 small, silvery blows. "Because when they spoke to you that night, you did not look ashamed of yourself, only tired of them. It reminded me of what strength can look like when the world insists on misnaming it." Eleanor had not expected the ache that answer caused. Praise is dangerous when one has been starved of it. It can go to the bloodstream like strong wine. "I was ashamed," she said after a moment. "Not of myself, perhaps, but of being heard. Would you rather I had walked away?" She thought of that. Of him above the room, hearing it all and turning aside. Somehow that was worse. "No," she admitted. "Only, I do not know how to stand inside another person's pity with dignity and tact." He said nothing for a few seconds. Then, very softly, "You still mistake me." She looked up. There was no mockery in him, no lightness. Only that grave, intent regard that always made her feel as if he were seeing the precise shape of what she tried to hide. "Then what is this?" she asked before she could stop herself. His answer came in a low voice that did not waver. Interest, admiration, concern, hunger for your company. I can sort the order later if you like. Her heart gave a painful, impossible beat. At once she retreated into self-command because the alternative was to let hope in, and hope had sharp teeth. My lord, you say dangerous things very calmly, and you hear them as if they are addressed to someone else. Perhaps because I have spent years proving they are. He moved then, a single step nearer. Rain drummed in the grass. Somewhere far off, a bell sounded for tea. Miss Vale, he said, if I wanted your sister, do you believe I would spend my days in ruined chapels, learning the architecture of your silences? She could not answer, not because she did not have one, but because every answer available to her seemed to open a door she had been ordered all her life to keep shut. A drop of rain blew in through the broken arch and struck her wrist, cold as shock. Adrian's hand lifted as if to touch that spot, then stopped halfway and fell again. The restraint of it undid her more than touch would have done. Come, he said at last, his voice rougher. If we stay here much longer, the house will invent a scandal more picturesque than truth. They walked back through the rain beneath the same umbrella, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers with each step. He did not speak again. He did not need to. Eleanor felt more keenly in that silence than she had in all the conversations of her season. By evening, the gossip had ripened. It moved through Ashdown Park in murmurs and glances, in the way doors seemed to open on them more often than chance ought to allow. Rosamond, who had spent her life understanding the weather of a room by instinct, grew brighter and sharper by turns. She sang exquisitely after dinner and directed every note toward Adrian. He applauded with good breeding and asked Eleanor afterwards whether the old Italian song was in fact tragic or merely dramatic. Rosamond nearly dropped her fan. That should have amused Eleanor. Instead, it exhausted her. She could feel her mother's anger gathering like thunder. She could feel Lady Corban recalculating every plan. Most dangerous of all, she could feel her own defenses thinning. She slept badly. In the morning, she found a small parcel on the table in the morning room where the ladies took tea before the household assembled. No card accompanied it. Inside lay a pair of gloves of plain, excellent kid, dove grey, unadorned. Her own, mended too many times, had finally split across one palm the day before when she caught the music in the wind. Eleanor stared at the gloves, heat rising to her face. Rosamond entered just then and saw them at once. "Oh," she said. "A gift. How singular." Eleanor closed the lid. Perhaps they were left there by mistake. Rosamond's smile was lovely and dangerous. Men do not make mistakes in kid leather, Eleanor. Mrs. Vale came in a moment later. One look at the parcel, one look at Rosamond's expression, and all pretense vanished. "Who sent them?" "I do not know. Do not insult me." Eleanor held her ground. No card was enclosed. Mrs. Vale stepped closer. "If Lord Renford imagines you are encouraging him—" "Eleanor encourages no one," Rosamond said with a little laugh. "That is rather the problem." The cruelty of it would once have made Eleanor flinch. Now it only made her tired. She turned to her sister. "If you are distressed, Rosamond, say so plainly. Do not borrow wit from Mamma's drawing room." Rosamond's eyes flashed. For a second, the younger woman's beauty could not disguise what lay beneath it. Panic. "You think because he has asked you twice to dance that something has changed. It has not. Men amuse themselves. They admire novelty. It does not mean they marry shadows." Mrs. Vale seized on that instantly. "Exactly. You will return the gloves." Eleanor looked from one to the other. "No, I will not return what I was not meant to receive publicly. That would be melodrama. I will simply wear them, and the matter may rest where it ought." "Ingratitude becomes you strangely," Mrs. Vale snapped. Eleanor lifted the gloves and met her mother's gaze. "No, Mamma. Plainness does. I have worn it so long, I know the cut." She left the room before either of them could answer. Her hands shook only when she was alone in the corridor. That afternoon, Lady Corbin hosted an archery party on the south lawn. Rosamond wore white and looked, as several guests eagerly remarked, like the goddess of the morning. Eleanor wore soft brown and would have escaped attendance altogether if Lady Corbin had not ordered every unmarried woman in the house into visibility. Archery proved a disappointment to almost everyone except Adrian, who had the relaxed competence of a man who actually knew how to use a bow. Rosamond posed admirably with hers and missed the target entirely. Eleanor, having learned from her father in quieter years, hit the outer rings twice and would have stopped there if Lady Corbin had not pressed her to continue with an acid sweetness she recognized too well. "Oh, by all means, Eleanor. Astonish us. It is healthy for a family when every daughter excels at something." There were smiles, waiting ones. Eleanor stepped to the mark. The lawn shimmered in heat. She drew, released, and struck the red center so cleanly that the little crowd gasped. For an instant, even she looked surprised. Adrian did not clap first. He simply looked at her with such unguarded pleasure that the applause which followed felt secondary. "Miss Vale," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "if you continue making talents appear from nowhere, I shall be accused of encouraging deception." She lowered the bow, pulse jumping. "Then I ought to disappoint you at once, my lord. I have no talent for deception at all." A murmur ran through the company. Lady Corbin's smile froze. Rosamond turned away and laughed too brightly at something no one had said. Later, when refreshments were served under striped awnings, Sir Basil Crowe arrived. He was a widower of 45 with a red face, excellent horses, a fortune acquired through ironworks, and a habit of looking at women as though deciding where to place them in his household. Lady Corbin welcomed him with enthusiasm. Mrs. Vale's relief was visible. Eleanor understood why the moment she saw him glance at her, then at her mother, with proprietary curiosity. Sir Basil bowed over her hand longer than politeness required. "Miss Vale, Lady Corbin has told me you are the sensible daughter. I hope she did not apologize for it." He chuckled, perhaps not noticing that Adrian, standing a few feet away, had gone utterly still. "A sensible wife is a rarer treasure than a pretty one," Sir Basil declared. "Prettiness fades. Good management does not." It was impossible to say whether he meant to flatter. The result was insult, dressed as pragmatism. Eleanor withdrew her hand. "Then I wish you success in your search, sir." Adrian crossed to her side with the smoothness of a man too disciplined to show offense. "Sir Basil," he said, "I did not know you were expected." Crowe grinned. "I was invited to improve the company, Renford." I had not found it lacking. The two men looked at one another. Everyone nearby pretended not to notice. Eleanor could feel her mother's eyes burning into her from beneath the awning. Sir Basil turned away first, laughing, but something in his expression promised future unpleasantness. That evening, Mrs. Vale demanded Eleanor come to her room. "You will receive Sir Basil graciously," she said without preamble. "He is a man of substance and has expressed curiosity." Eleanor stared. "Curiosity? Interest, then. Do not force me to spell everything. We are not in a position to insult practical prospects." Practical. The word seemed to strip the skin off everything it touched. You would sell Rosamond to a title and me to iron. Mrs. Vale's face hardened. "I would save this family. Since your father's death, I have endured humiliations you cannot imagine." Something in Eleanor broke its leash then. "Cannot imagine? I have balanced your accounts by candlelight while you slept. I have written to creditors under your name so they might grant us 1 more month. I have given up every comfort that could be turned to coin, and I have done it silently enough that you could still call yourself unfortunate instead of careless. Do not tell me what I cannot imagine." Mrs. Vale stared at her, shocked into silence less by the words than by the fact that Eleanor had finally spoken them aloud. Then fury returned. "You ungrateful girl. Everything has been done for your future." "My future?" Eleanor almost laughed. "No, Mamma. Everything has been done for Rosamond's." She left before the first slap could land. Adrian found her in the portrait gallery an hour later, standing before the dark ancestral faces, with her hands clasped too tightly before her. It was an old room with a ceiling painted in cracked clouds and windows looking west over the lawns. Sunset had left it full of dim gold. He came toward her without haste, as if approaching a skittish thing required care. "I have spent 20 minutes being told by Lady Corbin that Sir Basil Crowe is a great acquisition for any woman of common sense," he said. "I confess the argument has not persuaded me." Eleanor would have liked to smile. She could not. "Then you have stronger nerves than I." He stopped a few feet away. "What has happened?" She should not have told him. That was reason enough not to. Yet reason had grown frail around him. "My mother wishes me to receive Sir Basil's attention seriously." Adrian's jaw tightened. "And do you?" "No." The answer came so fast it startled both of them. Relief moved through his face with such naked force that Eleanor had to look away. "She cannot compel you," he said. "Cannot she? A woman without fortune, living on her aunt's charity, is compelled every hour of the day. Only not always by law. That is not the same. It feels the same when one's choice is narrow." He took another step. The gallery, empty a moment ago, now seemed full of the painted witnesses on the walls and the fading gold light between them. Eleanor. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. He did it as if it mattered. She looked up because there was no resisting that tone. "I am trying very hard," he said, "not to say what I should perhaps wait another week to say with more prudence and a better plan." Her breath caught. "Then perhaps you ought to continue trying." "Perhaps." His eyes held hers. "But prudence is a poor comfort when another man's name is put before you." Something hot and dangerous swept through her. Hope again. That ruinous thing. She forced herself to answer lightly and failed. "You scarcely know me. I know enough to want more." "And what is more? Conversation in libraries? Rain in chapels? A little rebellion against a house full of scheming women?" His face changed at that, not to anger, but to something deeper and more wounded. "Is that what you think this is?" "I do not know what it is," she whispered. That is exactly the difficulty. For one terrible living second, she thought he might take her hand. He did not. Footsteps sounded in the corridor beyond. He stepped back at once, discipline returning like a shutter. "Then I will make it clearer," he said quietly. "Soon." He left her there with the word soon beating against her pulse like a second heartbeat. It ought to have steadied her. Instead, it made the next 2 days almost unbearable, because soon, in a country house crowded with observant people, could mean anything. Rosamond became all sweetness. That alarmed Eleanor more than any sharpness. She called her sister dearest in public. She arranged her curls herself instead of ordering Eleanor to do it. She spoke of Adrian with studied indifference and Sir Basil with airy amusement. Only once did the mask slip. It happened in the music room on the eve of Lady Corbin's grand midsummer ball. Rosamond was practicing while Eleanor sorted sheet music at the table. Sunlight lay on the polished floor. When the final chord faded, Rosamond said without turning, "Do you love him?" The question fell so suddenly into the room that Eleanor's hands stilled among the pages. "No," she said after a moment, because to say yes would be madness. Rosamond turned then. "You lie badly." "So do you." Colour rose in Rosamond's cheeks. "You think me cruel." "Sometimes you are, and you think yourself virtuous because you endure it." Eleanor looked at her sister, truly looked. Rosamond's beauty had always done part of her work for her, drawing mercy in advance. But fear was plain in her now. Fear and envy and the humiliation of being displaced in the one arena where she had always ruled. "I think," Eleanor said softly, "that Mama taught you to believe beauty was the only form of safety. That is not your fault, but what you do with that belief is." Rosamond's face trembled for an instant, then pride sealed it. "You should be careful, Eleanor. Men like Lord Renford are not rescued by tenderness. They choose where advantage lies." "And where does it lie?" "With someone the world admires." The words were meant to wound. Instead, they landed like desperation. Eleanor gathered the music and left without answering, but she carried the sadness of that exchange into the night. Lady Corbin's ball began with brilliance enough to blind a smaller conscience. Chandeliers blazed in the ballroom. The musicians filled the gallery above with sound. Flowers banked the walls. Carriages rolled up in a glittering procession until half the county had arrived to admire Lady Corbin's taste and speculate upon Lord Renford's future. Eleanor wore pale silver gauze let out from one of Lady Corbin's old gowns by the maid's clever hands. It was the most flattering thing she had worn in years, which was perhaps why Mrs. Vale frowned at it before deciding it still could not compete with Rosamond's beauty, and therefore need not be changed. Eleanor accepted the odd, painful comfort of that. She intended to dance little and vanish early. Instead, within 10 minutes of the first set, Adrian crossed the room and claimed her for the waltz. A waltz, not a country dance that could be explained as politeness, not a crowded figure open to interpretation. A waltz was a tension made visible. The room almost audibly drew breath. "Eleanor," he said, and if there was a question in it, it was only whether she would trust him now. Trust. She had not known that was what he was asking until that moment. Yet she placed her hand in his. As he drew her into the turning circle of the dance, she became acutely aware of everything at once. The warmth of his gloved hand at her back, the sheen of candles on polished floors, Rosamond standing rigid beside Lady Corbin, Mrs. Vale's face set like carved wax, the eyes of strangers, the pounding of her own blood. Adrian guided her with perfect steadiness. Not once did he let the room intrude. "You are trembling," he murmured. "So are you." A strange light touched his eyes. "Then perhaps we are equally endangered." By the second turn, the ballroom had fallen away. Not literally. She still heard the music, still saw movement at the edges. But the center of her world had narrowed to the measured certainty of his arm, the grave attention in his face, the impossible fact that he was not ashamed to be seen with her. That was what undid her most. Not admiration in private, not sympathy in chapels. This, when the music ended, applause rose here and there. Adrian did not release her immediately. He looked down at her, as if forgetting anyone else existed. "I meant what I said in the gallery," he said, in a voice too low for the room. "I know enough to want more." Then he led her, before all the watching company, not back to the wall where plain daughters belonged, but toward the supper room at his side. The effect was immediate. Conversations broke. Old ladies straightened in their chairs. Younger women whispered behind fans. Men glanced from Rosamond to Eleanor and back again, with hungry curiosity. Lady Corbin was forced to receive them with brittle delight. Sir Basil Crowe, who had been drinking steadily since 9 o'clock, watched from the door with eyes like wet coins. Eleanor could not eat. Adrian noticed and ordered her a glass of watered wine himself, his hand steady, though his gaze had gone harder than she had ever seen it. "They will carve us into slices by midnight," she whispered. "Then let them choke on the first bite." She should not have laughed. She did. It cost her dearly, because she felt, in laughing with him, how easily happiness might take root if she let it. That was the true danger. Not gossip, not Lady Corbin, not even Rosamond's bitterness. Happiness. The terrifying possibility that the life she had already taught herself to mourn might not be wholly lost. She paid for that laughter half an hour later, when Sir Basil cornered her in the conservatory. She had slipped away from the crush to breathe among the lemon trees and warm glass. The night beyond the panes was black velvet. The scent of citrus and damp earth hung heavy. She thought herself alone until Sir Basil's reflection appeared beside hers. "Pretty enough in candlelight after all," he said. Eleanor stepped back. "Sir Basil, I must return." He blocked the path with careless confidence. "No hurry. I wished a word. Your mother is a sensible woman. My mother often thinks so." He grinned as if she had flirted. "She tells me you understand necessity. That is uncommon in a female." Cold climbed Eleanor's spine. "If you have business with my family's accounts, sir, you should address my mother directly. My business is with you. A widowless house needs order. I dislike foolish girls. Jaw are not foolish. We might suit. The brutal practicality of it almost made her dizzy. Not even the pretense of tenderness. She saw, in one flash, the years ahead if she did not escape. Iron-smelling rooms, children raised by duty, a husband who prized her because she was manageable, not loved, but used in a grander house than the one she occupied now. "No," she said. Sir Basil blinked. "No." "No, sir," he laughed, genuinely astonished. "You may answer more wisely when you have consulted your circumstances." "I know my circumstances. They are exactly why I answer now." His face darkened. "Do not set yourself too high, because an earl has made a game of staring at you." The words hit where he intended. Before Eleanor could answer, another voice cut cleanly through the glass-warm dark. "It is fortunate then, Sir Basil, that I am no man for games." Adrian stood in the doorway. He had never raised his voice in Eleanor's hearing. He did not now. Yet there was something in his tone that transformed the air itself. Sir Basil straightened, blustering, but took one look at Adrian's face and thought better of prolonging the encounter. "We were only conversing," Crow muttered. "Then you will not object to ending the conversation." Crow gave Eleanor a look half threat, half calculation, and left. Adrian waited until the footsteps had vanished. Then he turned to her. "Did he touch you?" "No." "Did he frighten you?" Eleanor opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. "Yes," she said. He drew a breath, as if restraining himself from something violent and immediate. "You will not be left alone with him again." "My lord." "No." His gaze searched her face. "Allow me that much." Something in her gave way. Not entirely, not enough to make her weak, but enough that when he stepped nearer, she did not retreat. "He said you were making a game of me," she whispered. "Because once a cruelty is spoken, it asks to be answered." Adrian's expression changed. The hardness did not vanish, but grief for her moved through it. "And do you believe him?" "I have spent my life being told not to believe anything kinder." He stood very still. Then, with visible care,